Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Just a quick note before we start. I couldn't find the complete book on the app. It looks like it's either unfinished or they didn't upload the full story. Since a lot of you asked for this one, I had to improvise a bit. So please be gentle if the story feels a little repetitive or not fully logical. I'm not an expert writer, and I actually put this together pretty quickly since Friday night. Let me know what you think about it. Your feedback means a lot. I was reborn. In my past life, I was acknowledged by the wealthy Torrence family, my birthright restored. To compete for favor against the fake heiress, a girl named Celeste, I worked tirelessly, only to have all my efforts pave the way for her success. The business deals and connections I secured for the Torrances all became hers after I died in a car crash. My soul lingered, unwilling to move on, and followed the family back to their mansion. There, I overheard Celeste's monologue and finally understood. We were living in a novel, a story where she was the cherished protagonist, surrounded by doting admirers. And I was nothing more than a foolish side character, a moth trying to outshine the moon. But I was reborn, 20 years in the past, back in my mother's womb, with 7 days left until my birth. I clenched the umbilical cord in my tiny fist. So, what if she's the protagonist? Last time, I was brought into the Torrance family too late. I didn't have enough time to develop. This time, I'll start grinding from the womb. I refuse to believe I can't outgrind her. Round 1. Physical fitness. I couldn't see a thing, but that didn't stop me from my daily exercise regimen, a constant battle against amniotic fluid and the umbilical cord in my cramped little world. After 3 days, my mother couldn't take it anymore. She demanded another ultrasound, convinced she was carrying either a monkey or a mythological demon baby. The doctor, listening to my mother's complaints, fell into a brief moment of self-doubt. So, you're saying the baby starts kicking at 9 in the morning and stops precisely at 5 in the evening? Oh, and takes a break for lunch and a nap. A 9 to 5 schedule, still in the womb? That's more discipline than we are. Despite his skepticism, the doctor performed the checkup. The results left him speechless. Mrs. Chun, your baby is not only healthy, but incredibly smart. In your previous scans, the baby was in the wrong position, with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck. But now, not only has the baby corrected its position, but it has also untangled the cord all by itself.
What?
Untangled the cord by itself. A baby this smart before it's even born? Is this a genius? Genius? Just lucky, I bet. That last, sour-toned voice sounded familiar. It sounded like Celeste's mother. Were Celeste and I really being born in the same hospital? My suspicions were confirmed that night when Celeste's mother was moved into my mother's room. Compared to my mother's solitude, Celeste's mother was the center of attention, a constant stream of visitors flowing in and out. Sipping on some expensive nutritional supplement, she turned to my mother with a look of faux concern. Anna, why are you here all alone? Isn't your husband with you? My mother forced a smile. He's busy with work. I can manage. She was lying. At this point in my life, I didn't have a father. My mother was a small-time influencer whose life goal was to marry rich. At 25, she'd finally succeeded in climbing into the bed of a wealthy heir at a company party. The good news, she hit the jackpot on the first try. The bad news, she didn't get a good look at which heir it was. In my previous life, it wasn't until I was 8, after a routine blood donation, that the Torrances discovered I was their long-lost bloodline. Knowing Celeste was in the womb, right next door, only fueled my competitive spirit. Besides my non-negotiable hours of fetal movement, I absorbed information in every way I could. I listened intently to the 7 o'clock news broadcast in the hallway, and I analyzed the conversations of the pregnant women, their families, and the medical staff, deducing their personalities and interests. My mother quickly adapted to my 9 to 5 routine and my penchant for eavesdropping. She started making the rounds to other maternity rooms, her pregnant belly leading the way. Not only did she become a familiar face in the obstetrics department, but her physical stamina also improved significantly. A week later, both our mothers went into labor at the same time. The maternity ward was a flurry of activity as they were wheeled into adjacent delivery rooms. Aya! Screams echoed from the next room. My mother, chewing on a piece of chocolate a nurse had given her, felt a little awkward. She was just about to let out a token scream of her own when she felt a sudden release. The doctors and nurses stared in disbelief at the tiny, wriggling bundle on the bed. It took them a moment to recover. She's born already? Anna, How did your baby come out so fast? Do you have some kind of secret? My mother's 5-minute delivery broke the hospital record, making her an overnight celebrity. Expectant mothers flocked to see her, hoping to catch some of her good labor luck. Holding me, my mother beamed with pride. I don't know what happened. I didn't even have a chance to push, and she just came out. You mean the baby delivered herself? That's one smart kid. Well, a baby who can untangle her own umbilical cord has to be smart, right? And so, following in my mother's footsteps, I became a little celebrity myself. Every day, pregnant women would come to visit, bringing toys and holding me up to their bellies so I could impart some wisdom to their unborn children. Wisdom I had none to give. But I smiled at every single person who came to see me. In the womb, there were limited ways to compete. But out here, the possibilities were endless. Looks, personality, public appeal, it all started from infancy. She has such a wonderful temperament. She smiles at everyone, like a little angel. Totally. This one is definitely here to repay her parents. You're so lucky, Anna. Not like the woman in the next bed. I was just drifting off to sleep, but my ears perked up at that. The woman in the next bed? That would be Celeste's mother. It was strange. She had gone into the delivery room at the same time as my mother. It had been 2 days. I could already open my eyes and smile at people, and they still weren't back. Even a difficult birth shouldn't take that long, right? My mother knew about my eavesdropping habit from the womb. The second I stirred, she knew what I wanted to know. Are you talking about Mrs. Thorne? What happened to her? Did she have a difficult delivery? You have no idea. Just like you, the cord was wrapped around the baby's neck, and it was in the wrong position. I heard she lost a lot of blood during labor. She was in there for a day and a night, and she's still in the ICU. That's awful. Why didn't she just have a C-section? She refused. Insisted that a natural birth produces a smarter child. She wouldn't even take an epidural. Just endured it all. My mother's face paled. She hugged me tighter, her heart pounding with fear. Oh, my sweet girl. I'm so glad you didn't make me suffer like that. 3 days after I was born, my mother, carrying a suitcase in one hand and me in the other, moved into the hospital's postpartum care center. There, my self-discipline reached a whole new level. 7 a.m. Milk, exercise, vocal practice. 10 a.m. Milk, nap to the sound of classical piano. 12 p.m. Milk, nap to the sound of the news. Appearance and physique were strictly managed. Intellect, morals, physical fitness, and artistic ability, nothing was neglected. Another half-month passed. I thought I wouldn't see Celeste again until we were 3 or 4, but to my surprise, her mother became my mother's roommate once again. And this time, she wasn't just accompanied by her own family. The Torrence family matriarch was with her. I saw that familiar, kind face, and even though I knew it was too early to speak, I couldn't stop the first sound of my life from escaping my lips. Nana. My single word silenced the crowded, noisy room. Every head turned to look at me. Did that sound just come from the baby? No way. She's only been born for half a month. A baby can't talk at 2 weeks old. But there are only 2 babies in this room, and that was clearly a baby's voice. If it wasn't her, could it have been the other one? I heard that one is so weak she can't even suckle properly. There's no way she could make a sound that loud. Celeste's mother stared at me, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and jealousy in her eyes. I glanced at the sickly-looking Celeste in her arms, then turned my attention back to Mrs. Torrence, a chubby-cheeked smile spreading across my face. Nana. If the first Nana was an accident, the second one sent a tremor through the old woman's heart. Is she calling me Nana? Oh, you sweet child, let Nana have a look at you. Those chubby little hands, those big eyes, you're as beautiful as I was as a little girl. With 2 simple words, I had charmed the grandmother who had yet to hold her own granddaughter, turning her into a doting fool. She immediately slipped a jade bracelet off her wrist and gave it to me. My mother, though just an influencer, knew quality when she saw it. The sight of that bracelet almost made her drop to her knees. Take it. I feel a connection with this child. Mrs. Torrence held me, unwilling to let go, her eyes glued to my face. She had completely forgotten that she was here to visit the wife and child of her husband's subordinate. Celeste's grandfather had been a Torrence family loyalist since his own father's generation. Her grandfather, an aide to Mr. Torrence Sr., had died taking a bullet for him. As a result, Mr. Torrence had raised Celeste's father like a son. When he grew up, Celeste's father became the secretary to the eldest Torrence son, Alistair. my as yet unmet biological father. Because of her family's connection to the Torrances, Celeste was a frequent visitor to their home, practically a young lady of the house herself. When she was 4, her mother passed away, and the Torrances officially took her in, making her the true young lady of the Torrance family. This meant that if I wanted to steal Celeste's place in their hearts, I had to be acknowledged by the family before I turned 4. Time was of the essence. I looked at the smiling, kind-faced Mrs. Torrance, squeezed her hand, and snuggled my face, which was starting to ache from smiling, into her embrace. Mrs. Torrance's heart melted. "Oh, my sweet girl, you like Nana so much? Can you say it one more time for me? Nana. Oh, my little darling. Nana will come see you every day, okay?" Seeing this, Celeste's mother's face turned white with rage. She looked down at her own frail daughter and, with a ruthlessly, pinched her leg hard. Celeste finally let out her first cry. Wah. It was a weak, mosquito-like sound. Though inwardly furious at her daughter's lack of performance, Celeste's mother put on a smile and brought her closer to Mrs. Torrance. "Madam Torrance, Celeste wants you to hold her too." When Mrs. Torrance first arrived, she had felt sorry for Celeste and her mother, thinking she should comfort them. But after holding me and playing with me for a while, she looked at Celeste and saw only a small, sallow-faced baby, her face wrinkled from crying. Her interest instantly vanished. "The child is too weak. It's better to keep her bundled up and let her rest. Don't move her around too much." Celeste's mother's face was a kaleidoscope of emotions. For the next few days, Mrs. Torrance came to see me every day. Since I had started talking, I would occasionally let out other words like mama, auntie, and sissy, charming all the new mothers and nurses in the center. Except, of course, for Celeste's mother. But she was a master of disguise. "Anna, what do you think of this outfit? Wouldn't Nina look adorable in it? Anna, have you thought about which preschool to send Nina to? I heard there's a great new bilingual school nearby. Anna, our girls have such a connection. Why don't we make them godsisters?" My mother was a simple, vain woman with a natural weakness for the wealthy. So, even though Celeste's mother was only the wife of the Torrance CEO's assistant, my mother saw her through a thick filter of wealth and prestige. With Celeste's mother's deliberate attempts to get close, my mother soon treated her like a long-lost best friend. I pretended not to notice, continuing my daily routine of exercise, study, reading, and listening to music. It wasn't that I didn't want to get away from this woman. It was just that my mother's standing in her own family was so low that no one had come to visit her since I was born. Going home for postpartum recovery was not an option. As for changing rooms, I had considered it, but quickly dismissed the idea. My mother was completely caught up in the fantasy friendship Celeste's mother had created for her. No matter what I did, she wouldn't even think of moving. Besides, I needed Celeste and her mother as an excuse to continue building my relationship with Mrs. Torrance. Since I couldn't get away from her, I had to stay on high alert. A few days later, my fears were realized. "Anna, this is a special formula my husband brought back from Australia. It's great for boosting a baby's immune system. Don't you think Celeste looks much healthier these past few days? You were saying your milk supply is low. Why don't you give some to Nina?" After half a month in the care center, sustained by a variety of expensive supplements, Celeste was indeed looking much better. My mother, completely unsuspecting, naturally accepted the offer. My instincts screamed that Celeste's mother was up to no good. When my mother brought the bottle over, I turned my head away, refusing to drink no matter how much she coaxed me. Embarrassed, my mother explained to Celeste's mother, "Nina's never had formula before. She's probably not used to it. It's okay for a child to be fussy, but as a parent, you can indulge her. Anna, if your milk supply is low and Nina doesn't learn to drink formula, she won't get enough nutrients." Celeste's mother's tone was earnest, as if she truly had my best interests at heart. "How about this? Mix the formula with your breast milk in the bottle. Start with a small amount and gradually increase it. That way, Nina will get used to it." "You can do that? Okay, I'll try it." "You're so smart, Sharon." Looking at my mother's foolishly grateful expression, I knew I was in trouble. I had to find a way to break the spell. The next day, when my mother approached with the bottle, I didn't push it away. Instead, I played with it, taking a small sip every now and then. It was unusual, but at least I was drinking. My mother was relieved. Celeste's mother also seemed to relax. But no one expected that by the time Mrs. Torrance came to visit, I still hadn't finished the bottle. When Mrs. Torrance took me in her arms, I knew it was my chance. I opened my mouth and started to retch, my body convulsing, my eyes rolling back in my head. Mrs. Torrance's face went white with terror. She immediately had someone take me for a checkup. The results came back normal. That wasn't surprising. This was the 21st century. Celeste's mother wasn't stupid enough to use a poison that would be easily detected. But she never dreamed that I would bring the half-empty bottle of milk with me. When the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me, they tested the milk in the bottle as a last resort, just to be thorough for the Torrance family. And that's when the truth came out. The milk is mostly breast milk, but it contains a small amount of formula. The problem seems to be with the formula. We've analyzed it carefully. There's lead in the formula. The dosage is small, so it wouldn't cause any noticeable effects in the short term. But long-term consumption would inevitably lead to cognitive and intellectual impairment in an infant. I knew there was something wrong with the formula, but I never imagined she would be so ruthless. A little bit of favor from Mrs. Torrance was enough to make her try to poison me. If she ever found out I was the true Torrance heiress, she'd probably try to kill me. Mrs. Torrance, of course, came to the same conclusion. She made a single cold phone call. From that moment, I was no longer just Anna's baby. I became a tiny strategist under the watchful eye of a Torrance matriarch who recognized potential when she saw it. Even before I could comprehend gratitude, the effects rippled outward. Nurses moved faster. Visitors were guided carefully. Every interaction became a source of information. My battlefield had expanded beyond the maternity ward. The game had begun. From the moment I could lift my head, I observed everything. Meal times, checkups, hallway footsteps. The rhythm of the ward became my currency. I learned to anticipate actions, communicate without words, and orchestrate my own schedule strategically. I started small. A soft squeak when Nurse Lee delayed a diaper check redirected her attention without alarming my mother. Within a week, she was on cue, anticipating my needs before I even signaled. Visitors became part of my calculations, too. Mrs. Torrance had habits I could predict, the time of day she arrived, her expressions, her choice of words. Every grin, every coo, every carefully timed hiccup was leveraged to my advantage. Perception often outweighed reality, and I intended to exploit it fully. Celeste was easy to monitor. Her weak, hesitant cries revealed everything. Feeding times, energy bursts, reactions to visitors, I cataloged it all. Compared to me, she was fragile, slow, and easily swayed by adults who thought themselves clever. Even my movements were tactical. I rolled, crawled, reached with intention. By 2 months, I could manipulate my crib mobile perfectly while signaling readiness to play. Every action reinforced my image as a bright, well-behaved child. One morning, Mrs. Torrance arrived just as Celeste's mother tried her usual charm offensive with a colorful rattle. I anticipated it, reaching for the toy first, locking eyes with Mrs. Torrance as I held it firmly. "See that? So focused, so attentive, remarkable," she murmured, enchanted. Celeste's mother flushed, forcing a casual smile. "She's just lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it. Observation, precision, strategy, these were my tools. Even as a 2-month-old, I gathered intelligence, mapped the battlefield, and advanced my influence with every gesture. Nurses noticed my unusual habits. "Anna," Nurse John commented, "she responds to classical music better than lullabies. Her coordination, most babies aren't this precise." I observed their observations. Bottles left unattended? I nudged them toward me, taking only what I needed. Every detail, every interaction became part of my strategy, shaping an image of brilliance, independence, and capability. Visitors, too, were a playing field. A well-timed yawn, a slight laugh, a tilt of the head, subtle maneuvers to command attention and maintain influence without a single word. Even Celeste's crawling provided data. Her jerky, inconsistent movements were easily predicted, a constant reminder of my edge. By the end of my 2nd month, my domain was established. Mrs. Torrance's affection was firmly mine, Celeste's mother visibly frustrated, and the staff responded to my cues with near-perfect precision. My mother believed she was simply lucky to have a happy, healthy, intelligent daughter. But the true battle had just begun. The world outside the maternity ward was vast and unpredictable, yet even as an infant, I was shaping my destiny. Celeste may have arrived first, but I had already secured the upper hand. Every coup, every glance, every calculated move drew me closer to the Torrance legacy that had always been mine. By the time I was 1 year old, the hospital days were behind us, but the game had grown far more complex. The world beyond my crib was a battlefield, filled with toddlers, caretakers, and adults, astonishingly easy to manipulate when approached with precision. The first challenge, my playgroup. Bright toys, crawling infants, and the occasional screaming child formed the arena. I observed, calculated, and waited for the right moment. Timing, attention, influence, these were the rules. When a toddler with a shiny toy truck scooted past, I made my move. Crawling deliberately into his path, I fixed him with the calmest stare I could muster and reached for the truck. I cooed innocently. Mama, help? He hesitated, overwhelmed by my silent confidence, and handed it over. Victory number 1. I inspected the truck carefully, letting the others watch. Soon, the toddlers gravitated toward me, hoping I would share insights, or more likely, toys. By the end of the morning, I controlled the playgroup's resources. Celeste, of course, was present. Smaller, weaker, slower, she struggled to keep up. When teachers tried to mediate, she wailed pitifully while I batted my eyelashes and giggled softly. Naturally, attention shifted to me. My first social victory. The teacher praised me for sharing and demonstrating leadership. Celeste's eyes welled with frustration. She hadn't realized that in this life, I wasn't just a rival. I was a strategist. Patterns emerged everywhere. Toddlers had routines, adults had habits, and even subtle shifts in the Torrence household echoed through conversations and visits. Every birthday party, playdate, and casual gathering became a data point. I learned who held influence, who could be recruited, and where alliances could be leveraged. Social victories weren't limited to toys. One morning, Celeste's mother presented a stacking block challenge. Celeste toppled her towers in frustration, while I deliberately built intricate, tall structures. The teacher marveled at my dexterity, moving closer to observe. Celeste cried in defeat, tugged at her mother's sleeve, and suffered her first public embarrassment. I cataloged it silently for future reference. Caretakers became tools, too. A well-timed cry, a deliberate grin, or a curious reach could guide attention and resources. Each small victory expanded my sphere of influence. Other toddlers treated me as a natural leader, and teachers increasingly deferred to my preferences. Even simple interactions were strategic exercises. Selective sharing, encouraging Celeste to overextend, positioning myself for optimal attention. Every moment was calculated on the chessboard of early childhood. By my first birthday, I had achieved critical milestones. Gained the teacher's admiration. Subtly undermined Celeste in public without raising suspicion. Started mapping household dynamics, alliances, and loyalties. I realized my life's work had only begun. The world outside my crib was vast, complex, competitive, but mine to navigate. Every toddling step, every interaction, every carefully calculated smile brought me closer to the Torrence family legacy I was born to claim. By year 2, I understood that raw skill alone wasn't enough. Strength, charm, and quick thinking could win skirmishes, but strategy was the ultimate weapon. I reflected on my past life, the mistakes, the squandered opportunities, Celeste's undeserved victories. Each misstep became fuel for the rules I now lived by: outgrind, outsmart, outlast. No mercy, no shortcuts. Every decision was deliberate. I crafted my personal code. Observe first, act second. Influence without being obvious. Those who think they're in control are easiest to manipulate. Every weakness, no matter how small, is a weapon. A loyalty is currency. Spend wisely. Never underestimate appearance. A well-timed smile can disarm foes and charm allies. Celeste became my first test subject. Struggling on a play structure, whining for her mother, she revealed weaknesses I could exploit. One sunny morning, I executed a calculated plan. While she wobbled on a wooden beam, I crawled beside her, clapping and cooing, offering innocent encouragement. She overbalanced and fell into a soft pile of sand. Her mother rushed over, teachers hurried to comfort her, and I clapped again, smiling innocently, a perfectly orchestrated lesson in humility. Every detail was catalogued: her physical weakness, reliance on adults, timing of interventions. Adult behavior became another tool. A tilted head, raised eyebrow, or softly timed "mama" or "nana" could direct attention. Mrs. Torrence now consulted me unconsciously on minor decisions, such as which toy to give during playtime. Humor, too, became strategic. A spilled cup of water, a perfectly timed giggle, a small squeak could diffuse suspicion while reinforcing influence. Even my moral code evolved. Ruthlessness required discretion. Manipulate, deceive, and outmaneuver, but only if adults remained unaware. Ethics, I decided, were a luxury for the unimaginative. Control perception, gather information, never reveal your full capacity. By the end of my second year, the battlefield was clear. Every interaction, every smile, every careful move advanced me toward my rightful place and ensured that Celeste's early advantage was already a thing of the past. By the end of my second year, the daycare had become my personal training ground, a miniature arena where social skills, cunning, and influence could be honed. Celeste had learned to fear my carefully calculated innocence. Teachers began consulting me without realizing it. Adults and toddlers alike moved according to my subtle cues, and I watched it all with quiet satisfaction. The lesson was clear. Intelligence alone was wasted potential. Observation without strategy achieved nothing. Charm without foresight was meaningless. To survive and thrive, in the Torrence world, one needed all three, fused with precision and ruthlessness. I had mastered them all, long before most children had mastered walking. Leaning back in my tiny chair, a smirk tugging at my lips, I understood the truth. Small lessons led to small victories, and small victories, applied meticulously, would one day become absolute dominance. When that day came, Celeste, or anyone else, would have no choice but to play by my rules. By my third year, playground tactics alone were no longer enough. Real power, lasting influence, lay in alliances, perception, and careful negotiation. My miniature size was not a limitation, it was an advantage. No one suspected that a toddler could strategize, charm, and manipulate simultaneously. I began with the household staff, as always observing patterns, which maid preferred which tasks, which butler resented interruptions, which gardener lingered in the sunniest corner of the lawn. One by one, I made subtle gestures, a gentle pat for the nanny, an approving coo when the cook arranged my meal just so, a delighted laugh at the gardener's playful antics. Soon the staff adjusted routines, not because I commanded it but because they sought my approval. Bottles arrived on time, blankets were folded perfectly, visitors were subtly redirected for maximum exposure to me. Every smile, every nod reinforced loyalty. My influence grew in ways even I hadn't fully anticipated. Celeste noticed, of course. She watched from a distance, her mother hovering desperately nearby. But she was too weak, too dependent on adults to mount a counter. I cataloged every reaction for later use. Her tendency to cry when ignored, her instinct to cling, her social helplessness. Mrs. Torrence became my first official ally. Sentimentality was her weakness, and also her greatest tool. Strategic gestures, a timely smile, a playful grasp of her hand, mimicking her quirks, earned her attention and affection. A softly whispered "Nana" at the right moment won her completely. I experimented with tiny gifts, a ribbon from my crib, a hand-picked flower, an impromptu scribble presented as a painting. Each gesture softened her eyes, warmed her voice, and drew her attention. Emotion, I realized, could be wielded as effectively as any tactical maneuver. One afternoon, during a family tea gathering, I executed my first multi-layered diplomatic maneuver. Celeste's mother attempted to charm Mrs. Torrence with a story of Celeste's first steps. I waited, then deliberately lifted a toy teacup, sipping with exaggerated delight. "Oh, Nana, look at me," I said, tilting the cup with perfect imitation of adult etiquette. Mrs. Torrance's eyes sparkled, laughter spilling out. My little diplomat. Such poise. She's going to make a perfect Torrence lady one day. Celeste's mother faltered, and Celeste, trying to imitate me, toppled her cup and cried softly. I remained innocent, allowing the social victory to unfold naturally. Another data point, another advantage. By week's end, my influence within the household was undeniable. Servants and aides aligned themselves with my preferences. Visitors, relatives, friends, even Mrs. Torrance's close aides, found themselves instinctively charmed. Celeste faded further into the background, her mother powerless to counter my growing network of silent supporters. Even at 3, I understood diplomacy. Loyalty could be nurtured in advance, influence secured with gestures rather than commands, and perception, carefully controlled, was more powerful than action. The playgroup had been a battlefield. The daycare, a training ground. Now, the Torrance household itself was my arena. Every smile, every gesture, every perfectly timed laugh was a strategic move. Celeste may have been the family's apparent favorite, but in quiet moments, when no adults were watching, the true strategist, directing alliances and shaping attention, was already me. By my 4th year, it was no longer a game of small skirmishes. Celeste's energy returned, her mother desperate to reclaim lost ground, and tension simmered in the household. Adults remained oblivious, while I, seated in my tiny high chair, quietly observed every move. Celeste's mother tried everything: new toys, stage displays of Celeste's talents, public affection to steal Mrs. Torrance's attention. But I had learned to read adults with near-perfect accuracy. Every tilt of an eyebrow, every subtle shift in voice, every lean toward one child or the other. It was all data, meticulously catalogued for my next move. One morning at breakfast, Celeste's mother launched her usual charm offensive. She presented a meticulously arranged tray of food to Celeste, speaking loudly about nutrition, refinement, and potential. Naturally, I had anticipated her move. I reached for my own tray with exaggerated delight, performing a careful tasting ritual, every gesture deliberate. Mrs. Torrance paused, watching me closely. I tilted my head, clapped softly, and exclaimed, "Nana," wide-eyed, feigning innocent excitement. Her attention snapped to me. Celeste's mother pressed her lips into a thin line. Celeste glanced toward me, confused by the sudden shift. Victory, subtle, instantaneous, and undetectable. I orchestrated smaller skirmishes in the playroom and garden, too. A favorite toy accidentally rolled toward me just as Celeste reached for it. I laughed innocently when she stumbled, drawing the adult's eyes to my composure. Each minor incident reinforced my image: attentive, capable, remarkable. Observation became my greatest weapon. By noting the timing of smiles, gestures, and praise, I could predict and manipulate adult reactions before they even realized. A glance at Mrs. Torrance while she praised Celeste, paired with a calculated pout, redirected her attention almost entirely. Chess with miniature pieces, but humans were the board. Even my mother became a tool, blissfully unaware. Her vanity drew her into interactions that amplified my advantages. If she fawned over Celeste's achievements, a perfectly timed giggle or gesture for me refocused attention. Adults became pawns in my miniature game of influence. Celeste, though regaining energy, remained weaker in temperament and confidence. She tried to assert herself during playdates, but every move was subtly undermined. My mimicry, well-timed coups, and precise positioning ensured her small victories were always overshadowed. By the week's end, a hierarchy had emerged. I had secured Mrs. Torrance's admiration, staff loyalty, and the implicit cooperation of peers and teachers. Celeste lagged a few steps behind, unable to match my foresight and timing. The stakes were rising. Celeste's mother was relentless, and the Torrance household a web of subtle politics, alliances, and shifting loyalties. Every day demanded vigilance. Every gesture required precision. Winning small battles was no longer enough. I had to anticipate Celeste's moves, manipulate perception without detection, and cement alliances to carry me through the years. By my 4th birthday, I had conquered playrooms, households, and minor diplomatic skirmishes. But influence alone would not secure the Torrance legacy. Knowledge, like influence, was power, and I intended to acquire it on my own terms. Every adult conversation became data. Discussions about finances, art, music, and languages flowed through the household, and I absorbed them all. French from the cook, Mandarin from Mrs. Torrance, Spanish from a visiting cousin, each phrase stored like currency. I repeated them in soft tones during play, eliciting smiles from adults who marveled at my aptitude, unaware of my comprehension. Chess fascinated me. Watching Mr. Torrance Sr. move pieces during meetings, I memorized strategies, predicted outcomes, imagined entire matches. Celeste struggled with simple block stacking, let alone anticipating a chess move. Piano practice became another tool. I didn't just play, I analyzed. Every note, rhythm, and key pattern exercised memory and precision. Adults were enchanted by my talent, oblivious to my deep understanding of technique and theory. Each performance reinforced my intelligence, quietly demonstrating influence. Observing Celeste became methodical. Every sneeze, cry, misstep, and faltering attempt at social interaction was catalogued. Weaknesses: emotional volatility, physical frailty, over-reliance on her mother. Strengths: brief bursts of charm, cleverness, resilience under pressure. Each note filed away for future strategy. This early mapping allowed me to preempt her moves. If her mother staged a moment of triumph, I responded with perfectly timed actions that diverted attention toward me. Every intervention reinforced my image while subtly undermining hers. Charm became a weapon. Tiny smiles, subtle head tilts, and gentle gestures influenced adults without suspicion. Teachers praised my attentiveness. Mrs. Torrance's aides smiled at my politeness. Visitors gravitated toward me unconsciously. By appearing ordinary in obvious ways, my precocity was selectively recognized, maximizing its power. By the end of this phase, I realized education and influence were inseparable. Knowledge amplified charm. Charm amplified influence. Influence unlocked more knowledge. Every small victory, lesson learned, and observation of Celeste added to the architecture of my long-term strategy. Before most children could form full sentences, I had laid the foundation for a life built to outsmart, outlast, and ultimately outshine Celeste. The seeds of genius, carefully sown in infancy and nurtured with precision, were beginning to sprout. By age 4.5, the Torrance household had become a stage, and I had mastered performance. My audience, distant relatives, family friends, and the occasional socialite wandering through the estate. Each event was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of intellect, charm, and influence, ensuring Celeste remained a faint echo in the background. My first real test arrived at a small family gathering for Mr. Torrance Sr.'s birthday. The dining room gleamed with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and the faint scent of roses masking nervous energy. Celeste, in her mother's arms, fussed immediately. I was ready. A soft, deliberate clap, a beaming smile at Mrs. Torrance, and a perfectly timed Nana drew her attention instantly. I offered a tiny, hand-picked ribbon for morning playtime. "Oh, what a darling! Such thoughtfulness!" Mrs. Torrance exclaimed. Conversation subtly shifted toward me, and I filed every reaction in my mental archive. Celeste's mother tried to redirect attention. "Look at Celeste's new dress, Mrs. Torrance."
"Isn't it exquisite?" she said.
Celeste waved and smiled, but my tiny bow, sparkling eyes, and soft laugh outshone her every effort. I noted everything carefully. Celeste's strengths, beauty, charm, were fleeting. My combination of thoughtfulness, timing, and strategic charm consistently eclipsed hers. Later, during cake cutting, I executed a subtle tactical maneuver. As Celeste reached for the first slice, I crawled slightly ahead and extended my hand with exaggerated anticipation. Adults almost instinctively allowed me the first piece. Celeste's mother fumed quietly, and Celeste pouted. I smiled innocently, mentally noting the psychological advantage gained. Even reporters and photographers became unwitting pawns. My coups, soft gestures, and awareness of camera angles ensured I appeared in every photograph, while Celeste's presence remained minimal. By the afternoon's end, the narrative was clear. I was the child everyone admired, charming, clever, poised beyond my years. Celeste, despite her mother's efforts, remained secondary. By observing patterns in adult attention, I refined my strategies further. Small acts of politeness, an artfully timed laugh, or gestures mirroring Mrs. Torrance enhanced my public image without overtly challenging anyone. Influence, I realized, was not domination, it was perception. The right moment, the right action, a carefully curated display could convey genius while keeping rivals like Celeste off balance. By the end of the gathering, my public reputation was cemented. Relatives whispered about my intelligence and charm. Staff glanced at me with admiration and cautious respect. Even distant observers noted my precocious nature. Celeste learned another hard lesson. Public events were arenas I had mastered long before she could even consider competing. It was my first true public victory. Influence extended beyond the household, becoming social, documented, and permanent. Every smile, gesture, and calculated interaction strengthened my position. The foundation for teenage and adult influence was laid, not by accident, but by design. By the time I turned 5, I no longer reacted to the world. I anticipated, calculated, and shaped it to my advantage. While most children focused on toys, stories, or playground antics, I devoted myself to a grander game, securing the Torrance inheritance, influencing the household, and ensuring Celeste's irrelevance. I cataloged relationships and tendencies of every adult, servant, and child I encountered. Each smile, glance, and offhand comment was analyzed. Patterns emerged, and with patterns came opportunity. I drafted mental blueprints for alliances. Household staff, attuned to my small gestures, formed a network of loyalty. Easily charmed relatives could be persuaded to support me. Teachers and tutors, subtly influenced with politeness and praise, became allies. Every tiny relationship was a thread in a web no one, not even Celeste, could penetrate. I planted seeds for the future. Offering Mrs. Torrence a flower or ribbon was more than charm. It was a message, foresight, thoughtfulness, and precociousness. Subtle guidance during play or corrections in the classroom weren't idle acts. They built credibility, trust, and influence. By formal schooling, these seeds would bloom into loyalty, reputation, and leverage. Celeste remained a focus. Her charm could sway attention temporarily, but reliance on adults, lack of foresight, and emotional volatility kept her predictable. I envisioned scenarios where her minor victories would falter under my subtle manipulations. Every laugh, pout, or misstep became data in my strategy. Even seeds of future business and social influence began taking shape. Adult conversations about wealth, power, and marriage prospects were cataloged carefully. Every book I absorbed, every piece of music I mastered, every word I uttered was an investment in a future I controlled. Strategy wasn't just domination. Emotional intelligence became core. Loyalty was fragile, perception was everything, and charm could be weaponized without cruelty. I practiced balancing ruthlessness with discretion, manipulation with empathy, ambition with patience. One day, I would need to win not just power but respect and even affection from those I influenced. By night, I reflected quietly, imagining the Torrence mansion, rooms full of allies and rivals alike, conflicts navigated with calm, precise calculation. Celeste's mother scheming endlessly, unaware that I had anticipated every move. Mrs. Torrence subtly guiding my rise. My own position, ever more secure, built on years of careful observation, charm, and intellect. I had begun to see the contours of my destiny. The Torrence inheritance, secured by foresight, loyalty, and calculated influence. Social dominance, achieved through charm, intellect, and perception management. Celeste's gradual irrelevance, engineered subtly, patiently, and without detection. These were not idle fantasies. They were strategies, meticulously planned and quietly executed. Every word, smile, and gesture in my young life was a move in a game stretching decades into the future. By 5.5, the game had advanced. I was ready for my first major, undeniable victory over Celeste. The Torrence family's annual spring gala, a small but significant social event attended by distant relatives, family friends, and key household advisors. Celeste's mother arrived early, hoping to stage a display of brilliance with rehearsed lines and carefully chosen attire. I anticipated every detail. Carried by my unsuspecting mother, I scanned the room with intensity beyond my size. Each gaze, whisper, and gesture was catalogued. I knew exactly how events would unfold, unless I intervened. Step 1. Attention diversion. As Celeste began her performance, I extended a carefully chosen flower from my crib to Mrs. Torrence, smiling and cooing with perfect timing. Her eyes softened. "My little strategist," she exclaimed, drawing all eyes toward me. Step 2. Emotional leverage. As Celeste stumbled slightly, I giggled in delight. Not mockery, only charm, timed to coincide with her faltering. Guests instinctively glanced at me, drawn by the contrast between my calm, joyful composure and her awkwardness. Celeste's mother stiffened, realizing her carefully orchestrated display was unraveling. By 7.5, my interactions were no longer subtle, they were meticulously orchestrated exercises in social engineering. A simple playdate with multiple children became a miniature council meeting. I guided the selection of games, mediated disputes with imperceptible nudges, and positioned myself as the natural center of attention. Peers deferred, adults admired, and Celeste, despite her efforts, struggled to assert herself without exposing her own weaknesses. Language, music, and logic were no longer mere pursuits. They were instruments of influence. A French phrase casually dropped signaled sophistication. A perfectly timed piano note elicited praise while subtly reminding everyone of my talent. A chess-like approach to resolving conflicts among children demonstrated strategic foresight. Each display, while appearing incidental, reinforced the invisible web of loyalty and respect I was weaving. Even ordinary routines became stages for observation and testing. Snack time revealed preferences and weaknesses. Lessons in arithmetic displayed patience or frustration thresholds. Casual walks in the garden exposed hierarchies among staff and peers. Every interaction was a data point. Every reaction, a test subject. Every minor success reinforced my growing reputation. Celeste remained my primary benchmark, a living measure of my progress. I cataloged her strengths, occasional charm, brief bursts of cleverness, instinctive social awareness. But I recorded her weaknesses even more meticulously: dependence on adult intervention, susceptibility to distraction, predictable emotional responses. Small victories were planned around these observations: a misstep at the right moment, a well-timed laugh, a gentle redirection of attention. Each one reinforced my dominance without ever appearing deliberate. By year's end, the household had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Staff consulted me instinctively. Peers deferred without realizing it. Adults, tutors, relatives, casual visitors were drawn to my quiet competence and apparent precocity. Celeste's mother grew increasingly tense, unable to comprehend the invisible network that had formed around me. Celeste herself, still learning, remained a few steps behind, forever chasing shadows while I moved forward with calculated ease. I had begun to understand a fundamental principle of power. True influence is cumulative, invisible, and sustained. Each day added threads to the network I had begun to weave. Each small victory, over Celeste, over peers, over adults, was a stitch in a tapestry that no one could dismantle without my awareness. By 7, it was no longer a game of toys, praise, or fleeting admiration. It was a lifelong strategy, carefully nurtured, continuously refined, and inexorably advancing toward ultimate control of the Torrence world. Even in youth, I understood what most adults never did. Dominance was not a single event, a dramatic moment, or a show of force. It was patience, precision, subtlety, foresight. It was knowing which words to say, which gestures to make, which silences to hold. It was being several moves ahead, always anticipating, always guiding, always quietly winning. Each night, as I lay in bed reviewing the day's interactions, I felt the satisfaction of a general surveying a battlefield after a successful campaign. Celeste might continue to try, adults might continue to meddle, and the world might seem chaotic to those not watching, but I, ever alert, ever calculating, was already several steps ahead. The Torrence legacy was not merely my birthright, it was mine to secure, mine to shape, and mine to dominate. By 12 and a half, the network I had begun weaving as a toddler had matured into a complex lattice of influence, alliances, and subtle leverage. I no longer relied solely on charm or intellect. Timing, perception management, and strategic intervention were now the cornerstones of my approach. Each conversation, each interaction, each seemingly innocuous suggestion carried weight. Adults deferred instinctively, peers followed unconsciously, and rivals, like Celeste, struggled to anticipate the moves of someone who had been thinking several steps ahead for more than a decade. School events became stages for quiet dominance. Group projects were arenas where I could guide outcomes without appearing to do so. Debates became exercises in persuasion, logic, and emotional control. Extracurricular competitions were carefully timed demonstrations of skill, subtly reminding everyone of my competence. Even casual interactions, the hallway greeting, the shared glance, the well-placed compliment, reinforced my position. Every action fed into the larger narrative. I was reliable, intelligent, and socially indispensable. Celeste remained a constant reference point, her every move cataloged and analyzed. She had learned some caution, but her reliance on adult validation and her limited strategic foresight meant she remained reactive. Minor public victories, an award, a compliment, recognition from a teacher, were predictable, and I had devised countermeasures for each. Subtle interventions, timing a question just so, highlighting a different perspective in class, or offering a collaborative gesture to peers, ensured her moments of triumph were diluted or redirected without raising suspicion. Beyond individual rivals, I had begun to consider the larger ecosystem. Families, social circles, and community hierarchies were no longer abstract, they were chessboards. Knowledge of tendencies, biases, preferences, and ambitions was my currency. I stored information like a meticulous archivist, connecting dots, anticipating outcomes, predicting alliances before they formed. My precocious reputation opened doors, but strategy kept them open, ensuring influence was not fleeting but durable. By the time adolescence fully set in, I had developed an intuitive sense of leverage. Authority figures, once deferential because of novelty, now deferred because they recognized competence that could not be ignored. Peers, once indifferent, now sought my approval, unaware that their loyalty had been cultivated subtly, steadily over years. And Celeste, still striving to reclaim the attention she once monopolized, increasingly found herself chasing shadows. It was clear that power, true, enduring power, was the sum of observation, intellect, charm, patience, and anticipation. Every victory was a calculated step toward a long-term goal, securing the Torrence legacy, mastering social influence, and establishing a position so secure that no rival could undermine it. Childhood and early adolescence had not been preparation. They had been the first phase of a lifelong campaign, and I was already well ahead on the board. Even as I moved through adolescence, social events, competitions, and school life became arenas for subtle conquest. Influence was cumulative, perception was paramount, and intellect was the ultimate weapon. Every interaction, no matter how small, contributed to a future already mapped with precision in my mind. By 12, I was no longer just a child of extraordinary talent. I was a strategist, a diplomat, a quiet manipulator of perception, and the undisputed architect of my own rise. Celeste had long since become a benchmark, a measure of how far I had advanced, but she was no longer a threat. I had outgrown reactive rivalry, operating instead on a plane where foresight, subtlety, and careful orchestration dictated the flow of events. The stage of life had grown, the audience expanded, and I was ready. Every move I made was no longer just survival or minor advantage. It was preparation for dominance. The game of influence, begun in playrooms and family gatherings, was now a full-scale strategy, and I, as always, was several steps ahead. By 15 and a half, I understood that social capital was as valuable as any tangible achievement. Every conversation, every gesture, every small act of competence was an investment. Peers who once ignored me now sought my guidance. Mentors deferred to my insight. Community figures began associating my presence with accomplishment and refinement. Celeste, for all her inherited charm, was increasingly relegated to the background, her efforts predictable, and, more importantly, anticipated. Public appearances became calculated exercises in influence. At a regional debate, I moderated my tone, emphasized others' contributions while subtly inserting my own, and timed each observation to draw admiration without arrogance. By the end, judges praised not only my skill but my composure and leadership. Celeste, performing the same exercises under her mother's coaching, faltered at moments I had foreseen, her attempts at dominance quietly deflected. Even informal gatherings were arenas. A casual lunch with classmates or tutors became a stage to observe alliances, note weaknesses, and reinforce loyalty. A well-timed compliment, a shared anecdote demonstrating insight, or a small, deliberate gesture of assistance strengthened my network. By 15, I had cultivated a lattice of influence that extended beyond family, encompassing peers, mentors, and peripheral authority figures. The Torrence household remained central, of course. Staff instinctively deferred to my suggestions. Advisors quietly sought my input before finalizing decisions. Even Celeste's mother approached interactions with caution, knowing that a single misstep could be observed, catalogued, and countered. Celeste herself, increasingly aware of her limitations against me, attempted more elaborate maneuvers, strategic alliances with other children, public displays of talent, but each was anticipated, subtly undermined, or redirected to highlight my own strengths. By 16, my reputation had become a self-sustaining force. Public recognition, cultivated alliances, and the perception of competence created a feedback loop. Those who deferred to me reinforced my standing, which in turn reinforced the loyalty and attention of others. I had learned to manage perception at a macro level. Public events, competitions, and social gatherings were no longer isolated opportunities. They were interconnected stages where influence could be multiplied, long-term strategies reinforced, and rivals neutralized without overt confrontation. And yet, the ultimate goal remained constant: the Torrence legacy. Every move, every victory, every observation, every subtle manipulation was a stepping stone toward control, ensuring that when adulthood arrived, The foundation I had laid over 15 years of careful calculation would place me at the center of the household, of the social networks, and, eventually, of the empire itself. By 16, I had learned a crucial lesson about power. It was not enough to win. One had to be seen winning, understood as capable, and trusted implicitly. Influence, once earned, could be leveraged endlessly, but only if perception remained carefully curated. Celeste's struggles were no longer threats. They were indicators of my success. Each failed attempt, each visible misstep, served as a testament to the efficacy of strategy, foresight, and meticulous preparation. The stage was set. The players were in position. And as I moved through my 16th year, I realized that every earlier lesson, from playrooms to galas, from playgrounds to recitals, had led to this point. The game of influence had expanded beyond family, beyond childhood, beyond mere precociousness. It was now a lifelong strategy, and I, as always, was several moves ahead. At 17, I began extending influence beyond the immediate sphere of the household and school. Early introductions to regional philanthropic committees, local business councils, and cultural organizations provided arenas for observation, networking, and reputation building. I approached each engagement with the same precision I had applied to childhood competitions: assess the players, anticipate their motivations, subtly guide interactions, and leave a trace of admiration in my wake. Mentors became conduits for opportunity. Those who had once been impressed by my precociousness now sought my counsel, invited my insight, and subtly deferred to my judgment in public settings. Their respect was genuine, but it also reinforced my position. Influence multiplied when wielded through trusted channels. Celeste, persistent as ever, attempted increasingly elaborate tactics. She leveraged her family connections, orchestrated displays of skill, and tried to rally peers to her side. Each move was countered with foresight. Minor acts of grace, strategic acknowledgement of her successes, and carefully timed interventions ensured that her efforts highlighted my superiority rather than diminishing it. Her mother, visibly strained, could only adjust reactively, while I maintained a carefully measured balance between dominance and civility. The first lessons in diplomacy emerged naturally. Public perception was as important as private skill. To maintain loyalty, I had to allow others to feel agency while subtly steering outcomes. A compliment here, a suggestion there, a collaborative gesture could shift opinion without overt force. Influence was no longer about commanding attention, it was about orchestrating it. By late 17, my reputation had become self-reinforcing. Advisors, mentors, and peers recognized my intellect, charm, and strategic acumen. Events I attended became stages where my presence alone subtly reoriented attention. Even Celeste's rare successes appeared diminished, their impact softened by my careful positioning. I realized an immutable truth. Influence was cumulative, multidimensional, and invisible to those untrained in strategy. Each interaction, each observation, each minor victory was a thread in a larger tapestry. By adulthood, this network of subtle control would render overt confrontation almost unnecessary. Celeste had become an expected variable, one whose missteps could be leveraged rather than feared. The horizon was clear. The Torrence legacy, once a distant inheritance, was now a landscape I had mapped in full detail. Every node of power, household staff, advisors, mentors, peers, and even rivals had been catalogued, analyzed, and subtly aligned. The transition from adolescent strategist to heir apparent was no longer a matter of chance. It was a calculated inevitability. And as I prepared to step beyond the familiar walls of the estate, I understood that my years of meticulous observation, subtle manipulation, and carefully cultivated reputation had created more than influence. They had forged dominance. Celeste, my oldest rival, was no longer a threat. She had become part of the evidence of my method, proof that foresight, adaptability, and perception could elevate one beyond inherited privilege. The stage was set. Every ally was aligned, every opponent anticipated, every public perception curated. The game had expanded beyond childhood, beyond competition, and into a strategic continuum that would define not only my rise, but the very shape of the Torrence legacy itself.